How's it going, travelers in the world? Thanks for joining today. Today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to listen to an interview between Erica Mandy and Jaime Garza. And the reason I bring this up is I listen to the Newsworthy podcast every day. And essentially what it is it's a Monday through Friday that Erica Mandy hosts. She's a former and I guess current still news commentator who has taken this format of giving a lot of news in a short time frame. So I love it because I try to ignore the headlines of the news on a daily basis because I know it can derail my day in a big way, both from just negative information and also just information overload. So for me to wake up in the morning and to be able to listen to somebody like Erica Mandy give me the highlights within a 5 to 10 minute format is wonderful for my lifestyle. And her tagline is essentially fast, fair, and fun, and on the go. So you can listen to this. If you're a podcast listener like you are, you can get this downloaded every morning, and it's in my podcast queue every morning as I'm getting up 6, 7 in the morning. It's ready to go. I listen to it. I get all the highlights from the day prior, and then I can move on with my day and not have to worry about looking at topics in the news. So by listening to her, she also has this Thing to Know Thursday where she brings up an important topic and talks through it. A couple of weeks ago, she had an interview about the Real ID and how it's going to affect traveling in domestically in America in 2020. So this conversation around this new form of identification seemed important to travelers. It resonated with me. I actually already do have a Real ID. Nikki does not, so she's going through that process. So for me, when I heard it, I thought this is something that travelers, especially American travelers, need to hear and understand because it's going to affect them going into 2020. So I reached out to Erica, asked her if I could use the interview on our podcast in a way to share it to our listeners and to give that back. I'll have Erica Mandy and the Newsworthy podcast in show notes. Wherever you're listening to this app, you'll see it in the show notes. For if you want to add her to your queue, I highly recommend it. And it's a great way to get your daily updates. I also have all of her social media links, as well as a link to this interview directly on her website. And as always, if you're just getting caught up with this format, my name is Matt Javit with Nikki Javit. We're a traveling couple, quit our jobs, left our careers in February 2017, traveled for 27 straight months to 35 countries around the world. And our hope in this podcast is to be able to give back to those other travelers out there that love travel as much as we do, want to go see new cool things. So we've shared our stories along the way of all the places we've gone to and ventured out to, but also the tips and tricks that helped us travel safely and on a budget for those 27 months. Through this podcast, through our YouTube channel, and at passportjoy.com, that's where we share all of our information. You can get all those tips and find the ways that we did all these crazy adventures around the world in 35 different countries, made awesome relationships along the way. You can follow us along. You can check that out as well. And we always appreciate kind notes as we're giving out this value. Recently, I just got this from Alex. He commented on kind of an old podcast. It's from our Bali trip, podcast 41. So he said, hey there, great podcast. We're looking forward to our visit to Bali, maybe next year. Keep up the good work. So it's things like that, is especially as we had an opportunity to reflect on our journey as we were in it and give immediate feedback on the things that we were going through and sharing that out there. That's the hope, is that people go through as they're making their journey and their trips, they go find people that have gone through it, and then they hear things and they try to build that into their itinerary. That's essentially what we're trying to do here. And we've got episodes that we've taped long in the past, especially like Lisbon and Vietnam. Those are the ones that really people go to and listen to a ton because we share so much information in that. And that's what we continue to try to do here on this podcast. We're still traveling and we're still trying to give back. So now that we've been back about 6 months, we're still trying to use the things that we've learned to continue our own travels. We just had an awesome weekend in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Nikki's real first weekend to get away and kind of hang out because she's been grinding out with her job for the last 6 months. So we're still doing these fun things. Some of it's in America. I've got an international trip planned in the next couple of months with my brother. So we're still doing these things, and we want to continue to give back and share through this channel and also with World Barbershop Adventures now on Amazon. Season 2 is about to jump. There's still a lot of fun stuff that we want to share in this podcast, and that's what we're trying to do here, and to give value back to the travel community. And one of the things we want to do is, if I hear things, I want to be able to give it back to you, and that's what this interview is with Erica Mandy and Jaime Garza.
And that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for Thing to Know Thursday, where a different expert explains a different thing to know, only on Thursdays after the news. And this week, we're talking about Real ID. In just 1 year, all travelers flying within the United States must have a new form of identification to get on the plane. In other words, your old driver's license won't cut it anymore, even for domestic travel, starting October 1st, 2020. Instead, you'll need something called Real ID. My guest today is Jaime Garza. He works with the California Department of Motor Vehicles, or DMV, and he'll be breaking down what information travelers across the country need to know and do now about the new Real ID requirement coming up next year. Hello, Jaime. Thanks so much for coming on TheNewsWorthy.
My pleasure.
So first, let's just explain the basics. What is Real ID, and why is it a thing in the first place?
You know, that's the most common question I typically get, because people really aren't clear as to what Real ID is. So this is what it is. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the 9/11 Commission made a recommendation that said that the country should set some minimum standards across all 50 states in terms of issuing driver licenses and identification cards to make sure that there are minimum standards for identity verification and security features that are contained within these cards. That's simply what Real ID is. And beginning October 1st, 2020, the federal government is going to require that you have one of these two cards or another federally approved document in order to fly within the United States or enter secure federal facilities and military bases. Let me put it a different way, because some people quite don't understand. If you're going to fly to Hawaii, New York, you're going to go to Chicago, you're going to go to Alaska for that matter, anywhere within the United States, you are now going to need to provide some form of federally approved document to get on that plane and fly. Wasn't like that before. So hopefully that makes it clear.
And so when you're talking about a federally approved document, that's going to be this new version of your driver's license or ID, or you can also bring a passport or something else that helps prove your identity if you have not had a chance to get this new Real ID.
That is correct. So the federal government, TSA, says you can use everything such as a passport card, a global entry card, a U.S. Department of Defense ID, that's a military ID, a permanent resident card, a border crossing card. TSA has a whole list of documents on its website.
Let's talk about what makes it different. So you need to have more paperwork to get it, and there's new technology within the card, right? Can you explain that?
Yes. So in California, we have beefed up the security features that are within the California driver license and identification card. In order to get a Real ID version of that driver license, because we do issue two driver licenses and they both offer you the same driving privileges, the only difference is that you're going to see a star in the upper right-hand corner, which makes sure that it is a Real ID card. And all the 50 states have that star. And when you see that, that means you've physically gone into a DMV facility in your state, and you've provided necessary documentations that the federal government is requiring. There tends to be confusion that this is a state program, when in fact it is a federal program and it's guided by the Department of Homeland Security. The thing is that every state has to implement its own program, and it works closely with Homeland Security in order to make sure it meets the correct requirements, so those cards that are being issued to the general population meet the federal standards.
I'm glad you brought that up. So even though it's a federal program, there are some differences state to state, correct? So where should people be looking to check what their state requirements are and when they can actually get their version of the Real ID?
We have a one-stop shop website, Real ID, here in California. Other states have their own websites, and so we encourage folks to check with their state Department of Motor Vehicles or Department of Transportation and find out specifically what the process is in their states. In California, we've been very, very fortunate that all of our major airports and our regional airports have teamed up with us to provide information within the terminals. And they're doing that for free because they know once October 1st, 2020 comes around, it could be chaotic in their airports if people are not familiar with the Real ID requirements.
Even with all those efforts, do you fully expect there will be people on October 1st, 2020 that show up to the airport with their ID from before and no passport who are not able to get on the plane?
Unfortunately, yes. And so that's why we are making a huge effort to get the word out. In fact, we tell the folks in California here, don't procrastinate. Find out if you want to get a real ID. But remember, the federal government will allow other types of documents. So a lot of people have said, I'll use my passport, or I will wait until my driver license is up for renewal. And that's what we encourage Californians to do. Wait till your driver license is up for renewal to come into the office and then handle the process. I can't stress enough, not only to Californians, but to Americans across the country, that October 1st, 2020 is a very important date. The federal government will be enforcing new federal identification requirements to fly within the United States and to enter federal facilities like courthouses or military bases. And you should be preparing now. Don't wait until the last second. So make sure you check with your local state operation to find out if, in fact, they are offering the Real ID currently. And if they are, what is the process that's required in order for you to get prepared?
And just to clarify, international travel does not change. You'll still need your passport.
I'm glad you made that point because some people are confused. This new requirement only is for travel within the United States, the 50 states. So keep that in mind. It's not for international travel. You will still need a passport to fly internationally.
Great. Thank you for listening. I hopefully you enjoyed that interview with Erica Mandy and Jaime Garza about the Real ID. Make sure you get on that. As always, check out the show notes. I'll have the links to her podcast in the show notes if you want to give her a daily listen. She's worth it. She's fantastic at what she does. And as always, check us out at passportjoy.com. It's where you get all the information about the things that we're going through and all the tips and tricks that allowed us to travel the world for 27 straight months, single backpack apiece, 35 countries. And you can also find the links on Nikki's book, my police book, the World Barbershop Adventures that's now on Amazon Prime. Season 2 is about to drop here shortly, and everything that we're going through on a daily basis. All right. Thanks as always for listening and checking this out. We really appreciate it, and look forward to talking again soon.